Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jon Love with ProChant. I want to welcome you to this webinar that we're having. We'll only have 30 minutes today, so pretty quick. Title of the webinar today is going to be 3 pharmacy reimbursement inefficiencies that you need to stop right now. And so I want to welcome in my partner in crime, Tina Ratliff. Tina, are you on?
I am on.
Hi,
Hi.
Tina. Good afternoon. Hey, Tina, we're going to talk a lot about pharmacy reimbursement of inefficiency, and obviously there are a lot of different ones that we could talk about, over the course of time. We're going to kind of talk about 3. In general, I think what I want to talk about is that infusion pharmacy reimbursement is complex. Maybe you could stop for a second and start by telling us kind of what you do for ProChant and your background in pharmacy reimbursement.
Yeah, so I am the Pharmacy Reimbursement Manager here at ProChant. I have worked with on the software side, billing software side. I've also worked on the client side as a reimbursement manager for many, many years.
Yeah, perfect. And so you lead our group, all of our group on pharmacy reimbursement, and we talk a lot about the issue of pharmacy reimbursement being complex. Maybe just start out by telling us what you're seeing across the country as you talk to pharmacy managers, you talk to reimbursement leaders, and in general, what the general sentiment is behind it being so complex.
Yeah, so when you think about it, billing really isn't just a back end, technically a back end function. Billing problems can come from the point of getting the referral all the way to the back end. So, it's reaching all those different parts. So whether you are a clinician, you're a pharmacist, the things that you do have a direct effect on billing. And so it can be kind of this very complex chain of events that if one piece of that goes wrong, it can have, bad effects on the end process.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And what I often tell people is that billing is like exercising. Billing and collecting is like exercising, right? You can do it well, you can do it poorly, you can know what you're doing, you can not know what you're doing. But if you're not sleeping right and you're not eating right, then all your exercising is just not going to work. And I think one of the things that we're seeing out there is that there are some things outside of billing that are really, really important for pharmacy reimbursement. Reimbursement just doesn't work unless all the things upstream, are fixed. And so, in thinking about that, what we're really going to talk about is the top 3 that we're seeing. Again, there are a lot of things that we could put here, but oops, went the wrong way there. So the first one, Tina, that we see around the country is really around poor refill management. I think before we start talking about, how to fix things, maybe you could share with us why poor refill management is the #1 inefficiency we're seeing in infusion pharmacy reimbursement.
Right. So, I've been a consultant with the billing software companies, and a lot of times when I go into a pharmacy, they'll take me back to the billing department and introduce me and kind of drop me off. But I tell them, no, I want to go to the pharmacy first. So, one of the things I find in the front end is that the refill portion is the best time to gather information. So some pharmacies might not contact the patient, I've actually seen that before. It's not common, but that's the perfect time to be getting information about your patient. Their information for them can be changing daily, and so it's very important that we use that time to our benefit, and to also help our billing staff in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's one of those problems that, we often talk to people and they say, well, you're here to talk about my billing and collections. And we're like, your billing and collections can't get good because that's downstream of a major process. So, when we think through our top 3 ways to fix this, inefficiency, let's talk through #1. So, they've got to be asking the Medicare required refill questions.
Yeah, so that's really a problem when, your collector gets an audit, a Medicare audit, and they don't have a good note that actually asks all the or answers all those questions that Medicare requires. It's also something that you can't go back and put in. Medicare requires that it's they already done at the time of refill. If you want to know the questions, they are found on the external infusion pump LCD. There's a whole section for refills. um, but that is a great time to make sure you get the answers to all those questions. They're very important. You could need them, maybe you won't, but if you do and you don't have them, you won't be paid. So it's very important.
Yeah, and how often does insurance change in refills, and what happens if we're not checking for that and verifying that?
Yeah. So again, calling to ask these questions, it's a great practice, but also use that time to say, hey, have you had any insurance changes? Some Medicaid plans and Medicare replacements are notorious where patients can change their payer from month to month.
Right.
So if you're not asking those questions, your billers are one going to bill the wrong payer, and then it could come back that the right payer you're not even contracted with, so you don't even get paid for that refill. So this is a great time to just make sure, just like you would verify the address, you don't want to deliver to an address they're no longer at. It's a great time to also ask about their insurance, maybe transfer them to billing if they have some changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, you got to get physician appointment information in refill management.
Right. So this is one people often don't think of. I'm almost kind of shocked sometimes when I see people actually asking this. It's great. So what this is about is, nothing's worse than when you're an auth person in the auth department and you're trying to get a re-auth on a therapy, and the auth department with the payer, they want updated medical records. What you got as a new referral is not going to cut it anymore. They want to know how's the patient doing now, though. So sometimes, you'll get on the phone, you'll call the patient, or you'll call the physician who wrote the order, and they'll say, I haven't seen this patient since I wrote this order. And so now you have no medical records to send to get your auth recertification. So that's a big deal. Same thing with an appeal. It might be an appeal for, an older claim and they want new records. So a good thing to always ask is, when have you last seen your doctor? And if they haven't, you need to go see your doctor. It's been a year. It's time to we're going to have to recertify that you still need this. You need to go to the physician and
Yeah,
get
probably
certified.
a really good time to tell our audience, as I forgot to at the beginning, that we are taking questions as we go. We're going to probably answer those at the end, most likely. So if you have any questions, just type it straight into the QA, the chat, and we'll answer those as we go. So number one inefficiency we're seeing across the country is poor refill management. So a lot of how we're managing our refills is really tanking our reimbursement on the backside. And so number two, and this shouldn't come to a big surprise, I think, to anybody on this call, is pharmacy miscommunication. We have some, really complex pharmacies out there.
Mhm.
And one of the things, if you want to get good at reimbursement, is that we've got to be communicating together and changes. But what are you seeing? What do you see a lot when you say, "Man, this is really what's going wrong"? Is that we have just bad communication?
Yeah. So a lot of times you'll get things like you'll run out of authorization units. You might not get a per diem code authorized that need to be authorized. You uh, they may be under skilled nursing and you have no idea. Things like that are just going to keep you from getting paid.
Yeah. And so, I mean, when you start thinking about, you've got to discuss these verbal orders with your billing staff. Walk us through why and the best practices you're seeing out there.
Yeah, so this one's super important. So even something as small as maybe a patient changing from Q24 to Q12, maybe they want to up frequency of their dosing. That's super important. So immediately, you may be mixing them that day. Immediately, someone has to know to go out there if that patient has an authorization, because that, even though it seems small, is a complete code change. So that new code for that Q12 is not going to be paid. And hopefully you get a payer that will retro, but a lot of them don't, and you're going to be fighting for your money. The other thing too is if the dosage goes up, you now need additional billing units on your authorization. They only authorize so many units, and once you use those up during billing, they don't there's no more. So that's very important, that you talk to the billing staff, notify them, receive this verbal order today, order change. Even if it could be something they don't have to, get something for, you never know. And so it's better to be safe than sorry.
Okay. Yeah. And when you think about gathering, the last two,
Hmm.
gathering patients' clinical information, obviously that seems really simple, right? But
Yeah.
it's difficult.
Yeah. And this is also, something else that you could ask on your refill call as well. So, um, with, with some of the drugs, like for example, the weight-based drugs, your authorization, in your dosing at that time that you get your authorization, those units may not cover those, you know, what you're going to bill for. If the patient gains weight and their dose goes up, now you've run out of authorization units. So that's another thing, is just gathering some of that clinical information. If they're had a recently had a doctor's appointment, which you could ask, during your refill call, have what was your weight? What is your weight now? So that, you can make sure that, one, do you need a dosage change order? But also, do we need more authorization units?
Yeah. And then as you talk about discussing, and notifying of inpatient care, who do you think's best to be driving this pharmacy communication? I mean, because what often happens is you kind of got those two sides of the house, three sides of the
Mhm.
house,
Mhm.
and they've really got to be communicating. I mean,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
John, that's the big thing, is a lot of the times when I go to pharmacy, I find that, if I ask a question, maybe I go in the pharmacy and I ask a question like, that's related to billing, they go, "Oh, we don't do anything with billing." Like there's a hard line drawn in the sand.
right.
Some are some are not like that, but there's some that are. And so I really think, you have to kind of open yourself up to kind of, maybe know some basic things that, this might be important to them. I probably should relay this information. Sometimes it's the nursing staff that make these calls, to check on the patient, do an assessment. And then sometimes it's, a tech that will call about refills and things like that. But just making sure that information gets back. So, for example, inpatient care. So, talking to the patient, seeing if they've, a lot of times we find out during refill calls that the patient's hospitalized. Very important to take that information to billing. They may have a claim that they're about to bill for the prior week, that hospitalization falls into those dates of service. They're not going to get paid.
Right.
Same thing with skilled nursing facility. If the patient is entered a skilled nursing facility, a lot of times your best way of knowing that stuff is really talking to the patient or their family. They'll tell you.
Yeah, and for those of you on the line, we have a lot of people on the line here. Again, if you have any questions, just continue to type those into Q&A, and we'll answer them as we go.
Mhm.
But if you're like as ProChant, being the country's largest post-acute reimbursement outsourcing in both, all outsourcing and staff aug, we look at this as a kind of a factory. I'm a bit of a history buff, and I've been on a big Henry Ford click lately where, and he really understood automation, understood how to produce something. Oftentimes, Tina, what I see, particularly in the pharmacy miscommunication, is that those those lines in a pharmacy are walled off, but they need to be torn down.
Yes.
because yes, you're right. Clinical and operations starts everything. But in order for us to get paid, we have to have one single assembly line that, that takes something from obviously, coming in and producing it and delivering it and then adjudicating it and then getting paid. And so we really recommend, as a best practice, to tear down those walls. Those walls that are like, oh, we don't have anything. Like, if clinical and nursing and has nothing to do ever with billing, even at a top level, then you're gonna keep coming back to them, asking them questions that they should have already let you know. You're gonna continue, and I always talk about it. Think of it like a widget that's coming out of a factory. And somewhere something went wrong. It went all the way through, and it's not sellable. We have to take it all the way back up and restart it again. And that's what we look at when we see denials. That's what we look at when we see inability to collect. That's what we look at when we see we didn't have enough information. And so I think our biggest, for all of you on the line, would be, hey, do you have a strategy to tear down the walls in your pharmacy and let information flow from both sides? And that's a huge portion that's making you not get paid, have denials, have cash that stays on, AR that gets older, and honestly, it puts you into a bad situation.
And that's important on the billing side as well, John. So it doesn't just go one way. Billing really needs to understand what they're billing for. One of the
Correct.
things that I do with my brand new billers is the very first thing, once they start looking at tickets, is I send them to the pharmacy to watch them pack the boxes and explain to them, this is an elastomeric device. This is like a pump. They need to know what those things on the ticket are. Just
Right.
knowing what they can and can't bill isn't enough. It really helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Continue to bring those questions in. So, Tina, I think that we've had this conversation 1,000 times, really, lately. Uh, Again, another issue is, well, that's not, we're in billing. We don't have anything to do with inventory. Maybe you could start by telling us, as you have, some of the foremost knowledge of CPR Plus and Keratin, Brightree, all these different systems. Um, when inventory is wrong, everything downstream is wrong, right?
Yes, yes. Your inventory is the backbone of your system. Everything feeds off of your inventory. Your payer contracts feed off your inventory. Your cost reports, just everything kind of feeds off of that. So that information that's in your inventory, that is your most important database. And so it's really important that it's accurate.
And it's so funny how many people don't know that, you know?
Mhm.
I mean, we kind of think when we sit in front of someone and they're having a problem. And look, we'll talk about those problems, right? I mean, their problems are, we can't get people who know what they're doing. We can't keep people. We keep investing in someone, and a year later they know how to bill or collect, and then they leave us, and we start all over again. Or, hey, our director of reimbursement just left, and so we have all these issues that are kind of those frontline issues, and we get in there and start helping them. Obviously, that's our job, but then we find what we call backline issues, like you don't even need as many people as you think you need. It's because you're so inefficient, and you're in these backline problems that you're trying to make it up for it by people constantly fixing things that the system is supposed to do. you
Right.
know and so we see that all the time.
Hmm.
So everybody on the line would tell you, hey, listen, number one is you're going to cost yourself a lot more in labor by not having a strategy to keep your inventory set up. So that starts with inputting drug billing information, right?
Hmm. Yes. So I'm always very shocked to find when that there are actually billers out there who are actually keying information into their claims. Because and simply just because it's not in the inventory. There's a nice, beautiful, streamlined billing process that can happen. as long as that inventory is set up with that billing information. The issue is that usually the people who are inputting the inventory aren't billers. They're clinical staff. And so they don't
Right.
know this stuff, and that's okay. And we wouldn't want them to guess, So, but it is important that if you enter a new drug in your inventory, that you are notifying someone who does know the answer of those questions so that they can go in and update that information.
Which that's going back to our number two issue, which is we got to tear down that wall, right?
Yep, yep.
There's a communication wall where someone does something, and then we have the other wall where we've done this hard chop, and like, okay, well, I didn't know what went on. Well, we're going to continue to operate in with bad communication, and what's going to come out is not what we want. And so, what about with new drugs?
Yeah, so we want to make sure that one of the things that kind of feeds off of our inventory is our contracts. So if we get a brand new drug that we've never done before, that pricing information is not going to be in those contracts. So that's going to require you to go into all those contracts that are by HCPCS and make sure that there's pricing information loaded.
Yeah, and that should say contracts. I apologize. I shouldn't be in charge of making these slides, Tina. And so, but we're just gonna all see the R in there. But contract management is another way where what happens, and I'll just tell you what I see on my side, on the business development side. I get a phone call from a pharmacy, and they're getting 85 or 90% their cash to net ratio, and they're struggling. They're struggling because they don't have enough people. They're struggling because their owner or their director is frustrated that they have to keep hiring, and so they're losing people. They're having to expand people, and then what you find out is that you have all of these inefficiencies happening. So you have human labor, which is the most critical, wonderful, and expensive thing we have, all tied to things that we could easily fix if we just managed our contracts. If we had someone to manage our contracts instead of having to go back and refix and go back and refix. Same with audit inventory setup, right? Tina, you on mute?
Yes, sorry. Yes, it's really important to lock your inventory down. So, you don't want people going in there willy-nilly, changing things. Go, I think this should be this. You don't want all that. That just causes a ton of problems. But in doing that, what you want to make sure of is that you at least have someone in billing who has access to change the information that pertains to billing. And then also another thing you want to do is periodically run reports of the data that's in your inventory and do an audit and just make sure, look through there, nothing jumps out that something got left out, and just make sure that inventory is super clean.
Yeah, perfect. And so those have been, and I just want to, kind of review that. Hey, the number one efficiency that you can get back in your pharmacy is to be able to manage your refills better. Everything downstream will affect that. You got to tear down the wall between communication, between the billing side, the clinical side, the inventory side. Even though they have very different jobs, there has to be a golden thread that everybody's kind of got a carabiner and connected to. And finally, there is some nut and bolts around inventory and contracts that aren't something that you have to think about after the fact. They have to be part of your management. It has to be looked at every month. It has to be constantly updated. It has to be part of that. We do have a couple early questions here as we wrap up with the last 5 minutes, but please type in any more questions that you might have. The first question, Tina, is let's see. She wants to know, how do we know which patients to ask the Medicare refill questions to? So are you somehow in the system? Are you pulling that out on the refill questions for Medicare?
Well, I would just make it honestly a practice. The questions are things like how many doses do you have left? How many heparin? How many, to ask how many supplies they have left. And that's very important, things like that. So they're very good questions to really ask to any patient. So I would just to make it, so the same across the board. I would just ask all the patients that, you know,
So
none of it's specific to Medicare and as far as the question. It's just questions they require answers to. Another thing that you can do to make sure that everybody is capturing that data correctly and they are getting answers to all the pertinent questions is to create yourself a note template for your refill calls.
yeah, absolutely. So your best practice is to say, look, um, the Medicare questions, that should be your number one priority. You should ask those questions of everybody, and
Yeah,
it checks a lot of boxes, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, great. So we have two more questions here. If you have any more, please type them in now. So the question is, how does ProChant work with infusion pharmacies for reimbursement? So that question is kind of broad. So I guess I'd answer that in two ways. We do a couple different things. We do staff augmentation. So if you need, hey, we need staff that are trained in billing and collecting intake. And so we do that at a really affordable rate. And then we do full service billings. So we have our clients who say, hey, listen, we actually want to get out of the billing and collecting game and we want to give it all to someone. And so we have both of those areas. Really, for the most part, we kind of get in where we fit in. Whatever you need, we're able to support and do it. If you have great leadership but need labor, then we're able to provide that labor at a drastically reduced cost of what it would cost you to hire it. If you lose your leadership or everything's failing, we can provide that leadership and take over. Third question here is kind of around that communication piece, I guess. So, what do you think the question is, what's the best way to notify the billing team that a new drug needs to be set up or is in setup, I guess?
Yeah, so I know a lot of the billing softwares like CPR Plus and Care 10 have the to do function. Um, that is actually a really good function to ask questions to. You don't have to only use that if it's for a specific patient. You can use that to talk to each other internally without without assigning it to a specific patient. But the nice thing about it is when it is related to a specific patient, like the communication of this patient's in the hospital, I just got a verbal order for this patient. It actually, all that information is stored at the patient record. So it's really nice to have that there for everyone to see. But that's how I would suggest doing it. You could, of course, use, email, other inter-office chat type things. But I, of course, prefer the to-dos myself.
Yeah. So wrapping up with 1 minute left here, and really thankful for everybody to join us. Great group online. We do this every month. What we're trying to do is really give you a kind of a baseline to do two things. I mean, we don't want to bury the lead. We want to introduce ProChant to you. We're the nation's largest post-acute healthcare, home care reimbursement partner. And that's really what we want to do, is be a partner with your organization. But we also know that we've got a rising tide lifts all boats. And so because we're in all 50 states, because we're talking with people around the country, we see some things that maybe those of you who are locally or regionally might not see. And so we want to share that. And so again, we're going to wrap up by talking about our number one thing we're seeing is that poor refill management. You've got to make sure that our refill management is very efficient, and we'd love to talk more about what our best practices are. Probably the biggest thing we give you is that the walls have to be torn down in the pharmacy. You cannot, no longer can we participate in our highly regulated world to say that that's clinical and that's billing and they don't talk. We've got to have a golden thread that runs through them all, or we're going to continue to have inefficiencies. We're going to get denials. We're going to get things that stick in unbilled. Our cash is going to get older and delayed, and our AR is going to get worse. And we don't have the margins to do that anymore. And finally, there's again some nuts and bolts in your system, whatever it be, Brightree, Care 10, CPR Plus, a number of other systems. We infuse other ones. You've got to be able to do your inventory and your contracts. They're not something that can be an afterthought. They have to be part of your everyday process. So if we can help with any of those, we would love to. Again, my name is Jon Love. I'm Vice President of Business Development. This is Tina Ratliff. Thanks for joining us on this 30 minute little movement through these inefficiencies. We'll be back next month with another opportunity to talk through some things. Certainly reach out. I'll be sending out everybody just a thank you email. If you have any more questions or you'd like to set up a quick call to talk about what we do, or maybe one thing we offer is we offer complimentary audits. So if you're looking for a third party to come in and look at your data and say, how efficient are you? We're probably your group. It won't cost you a thing. So again, thanks so much. We know how busy you are. And as the world is in a little bit of turmoil, we'll always just kind of say, everybody stay safe and keep thinking about each other, and look forward to seeing some of you out on the road as conferences open back up. Thanks everybody. Tina, thank you, and you guys have a great day.
Thanks guys. Bye-bye.